بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Let's start with the comments and not rebuttals but objections to various things which we discussed in the video about Taliban and its legitimacy. Okay. Rash, can you start reading
Sure.
maybe the whole thing, and then we can go issue by issue.
Sure. So 1 second. Okay, so the context is we cannot dismiss some questions that have been raised because Dr. Masari's positions are radically different from the majority. They say the majority of Ahl Sunnah, but I don't know how valid that is because there was a considerable dispute amongst scholars. They need further step-by-step elaboration just to even explain the legitimacy of them, let alone convince people. I still hold the Khilafah is Fard al-Kifaya and I'm not convinced otherwise. Your point being that it's beyond your control. So how can that be an obligation if you don't?
We'll discuss that. Yeah. This is the introduction. Then someone came with certain. That's one of the Shabab discussing with another one. The other one came with like bullet points. Let's go through the bullet points. Okay. And then we start from the beginning. That's more efficient.
Okay. So firstly, a lot of these differences are not meaningful or consequential. E.g., the rule of permissibility, which is a principle a lot of other madhab have, and to be honest, has hardly much practical implication. It's hardly unlikely to be qati if it is differed so widely on. So basically, what he's trying to, a lot of what your points are based on general permissibility, and that's had a knock-on effect on your methodology. However, the assumption here is that it's not a qati issue for this individual, so it's hardly likely to be ijma on it. And what impact does it have practically on methodology?
Yeah, just you want to continue with the rest, or start with this point?
Okay. Shall I just read them all out and then we can?
Let's start with this one, or read to the end.
Okay, read to the end then. Secondly,
don't interject anything. Just read what he said.
Okay. Sorry. Secondly, his view on the importance of global khilafah is at odds with the ijma of all past mujtahids. In the video, he seems to see global khilafah as useful, sunnah, and degrades its importance towards the end, and interprets hadith on bay'ah as localized, which is highly questionable and can cause confusion to the ummah to accept weak and incapable states like Taliban. Thirdly, no mujtahid imam interpreted the hadith of khilafah in this way, not even the famous dissenter Imam Juwayni, who Imam Nawawi attacked in the discussion. Juwayni explicitly maintained, even with a local imara, there is an obligation still for khilafah, and it would be a temporary rukhsa fundamentally. Fourthly, the acceptance of Taliban has a problem with legitimacy. What could also argue to Daesh or Abu Sayyaf was legitimate, as although brutal, there is no kufr buah, and hence also dawla too. Therefore, it is untenable and unworkable position. Fifthly, the position also has a detrimental effect on the ummah, who this odd view will not see as impetus to work for it. I wonder what becomes of the proposition for working for khilafah is a fard, if we all believed in it. Basically, if we downgrade the khilafah as a fard.
Don't worry, just read.
Sixthly, his position on the hadith, if there's two khalifs, kill the latter is ridiculous logically again, without precedent from valid ijtihad. It is am to the ummah, not specified to a location. Who of the fuqaha had this opinion? And how is this even objective? It leads to all kinds of ridiculous outcomes as well. Does the Namangan area of Afghanistan belong to Daesh, who were there first? Are Taliban then Bughat there? What of Syria? If there is no threshold of capability, then do certain cities belong to different emirs? Some to Jabhat, some to Daesh. It's a ridiculous view. Lastly, I am not sure I would call his views ijtihadat, as not sure he's a mujtahid or if there's precedence for it. So those are the questions.
Okay. So let's start then with most except the issue of permissibility, but the rest is essentially concerning khilafah and etc. Okay, so let's go to the read again the one of permissibility.
Firstly, a lot of these differences are not meaningful or consequential. E.g., rule of permissibility, which is a principle a lot of other madhahib have, and to be honest, has hardly much practical implication. It's hardly unlikely to be qati if it is differed so widely on.
No, that's where the mistake begins, actually, and the fundamental error begins. The issue of permissibility, say, al-madhahib have it, he seems to be confused about that. What we are arguing is that basic ruling of everything, action, things, etc., is permissibility. And we argue that in the book of Tawheed, first for this, the following. There's agreement that the basic ruling about they call manafi in the universe, about things that are available for humans to benefit from them, unless the Sharia specifies something differently. And they usually invoke the ayah خَلَقَ لَكُم مَا فِي الْأَرْضِ جَمِيعًا مِنْهُ. Okay, so that's the usual invocation, is the correct invocation, and most madhahib say that, but it's more or less like a lip service. It's used only when we're talking about foods, that if we see a new animal, then we assume we can eat it, unless we have an exclusion based on a hadith or an ayah. You see my point? If it's applied consistently on things, like, for example, if a new vehicle is developed for riding, then there's no problem to use it as a ride entity. Riding is not only restricted to animals like donkeys and so on. We can use it, and even the ayah says clearly, والخيل والبغال والحمير لتركبوها وزينة ويخلق ما لا تعلمون. So we'll create other things which you don't know, which hence all possible transportation and riding animals and creatures and equipments until يوم القيامة, until all eternities even. So that's number one. So it's consequential. Let me give the misapplication of that. All this is stated in the usul, but they have neglected it. Just one historic catastrophic example is the printing press. What was the justification to declare it haram? It's a tool. It's something in the universe created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It can be used for writing on paper, writing with hand, writing with feet. If someone will have amputated hand, he may train himself to write with his feet, and we have examples of that. Does that need any discussion about permissibility or not permissibility? Let me just go to the general thing. See, that is even if it is said by madhahib, it's given a lip service. It's not applied consistently. If it had been applied sincerely and consistently, many blunders in Islamic history would not have been had been made. Like, for example, the issue of the printing press. But it's more general. What we are saying is that basic ruling of all entities, including action, etc. And the Hizb said every action needs that evidence, and they bring a lot of evidence. So that's true, because we are a slave of Allah, our action addressed by Him. But what I'm saying is that there is a general evidence came for general permissibility. There's already the evidence there, and the evidence in the Quran created everything in the heavens for you to use it. Which use? Every possible use, unless the Sharia restricts something. Then we have خلق لكم السمع والبصر لعلكم تشكرون. So hearing, sight, and mind. That's all human activities are based on hearing, sight, and mind. Is created for you so that you may be thankful. Meaning, you can hear everything, unless the Sharia says you should not hear that. You can say everything. You can look at everything. What's the conclusion if I look at everything? That everything can be looked upon, and everything can be exposed, unless the Sharia says no, this should not be looked at because it's awra. So awra has to be defined. So let me give a practical, and the ayah is qat'i, because it's لعلكم تشكرون. You did not thank Allah subhanahu if you don't use the eyes for that, what you get to see whatever thing. You did not see something specific. You say the eyes have been created for you. So you can look at everything. You look at rivers, you look at the sky, you look at mud, you look at women, you look at everything. Now the Sharia came and made certain restriction, declared certain things to be awra, should be covered and should not be looked at. So the question, is the face awra? No, basically not. Even the bum is not awra until the Sharia brings an evidence that the bum is awra. The Sharia brought an evidence, but for the face, nothing has been said directly. I know there's some hadith that we were disputing about, are they valid or invalid or so on. Disregard these hadith at all. The Quran speaks clearly for women, for example. It speaks of khimar, which is the head cover by necessity of history, by narration, necessity by surrounding nation of the Muslim world at the time, like Christian and so on, who have images and pictures of Maryam and people of that time and so on. And all of them had a head cover, which is similar to the khimar, which we know, and it's called that khimar. And they have also a fluffy dress, which is like a jilbab, or like an overcoat, like the one especially worn in Syria. Look at these pictures. And almost before Islam, that was known to everyone what is the meaning of khimar. And even the imama is called khimar. So it's the head cover. So the head has to be covered. And by necessity, the head does not contain the face. The face is different than the head. by necessity. The Quran says clearly, فَاغْسُلُوا وُجُوهَكُمْ etc. in the wudu. وَامْسَحُوا بِرُؤُوسِكُم. So the ra's is not a face. The face is not a ra's. By necessity of language, by necessity of reason, by necessity of history, by necessity of reporting. So the head has to be covered for a woman, khimar. That's the khimar, the head cover. Additionally, the khimar should be turned around to cover the opening of the jayb. And the jayb is not like many people translate wrongly. The pocket is not a pocket. It is the opening, which is called in modern dress décolleté, which opens the upper part of the chest and may show part of the breast or the boobs. So that's one has to be turned to cover that. And the jilbab is the all over body cover. It does not cover the head. It's only from the neck down to the ankle. That's the jilbab known when we see also in the images of Christian and so on. And that's what is known as the jilbab. And even what in Egypt called jalabiya is essentially that. If you look at the Egyptian ladies in the villages, they have inherited that over generation. So we don't need to ask it. The face cannot be awra, and this is clearly specified to be awra. So we don't need this ahadith, which is somebody may question, are they connected, not connected? So this has the importance. So say it has no consequence, it's a mistake. Let me give another more important mistake, sometimes whether the face awra or not. The following point, if action, supported also by the ejection, fulfill your covenants and your contracts. What's contract? Is the offer and acceptance by two persons, an agreement, the meeting of the will of two persons. That's the essential component of the contract. Allah orders to fulfill all uqud, all contracts. This means by necessity that uqud are the basic, and the direction of the will of one A and B when they make a contract is exercise of their human capabilities of mind, of eyes and sight. So it is a basic ruling with its permissibility. So all contracts are basically permissible, how structured and complex they may be, unless the Sharia injunction clearly indicate that there's a prohibition for some reason or another, and based on that, and if they are halal and concluded they are correct and halal and valid, then if they concluded they're binding for the parties and they have to fulfill it as a covenant breaker, and this is a haram. Could be a kabira even if you break the covenant, certain covenants, breaking them is a kabira. So this is mithaq, muwathiq. So we have to fulfill all covenants provided they have concluded correctly and the basic ruling. Now what does that imply? All sales contracts are halal unless the Sharia says this specific sale is haram. What does it imply? For example, relating to new contracts which were not known in time past, like insurance. The fuqaha, for example, when insurance started in Europe and so on, whatever motivation it was for them, the Hanafi said this is daman. They tried to compare it miqyas to an existing contract, which is not daman. It's different. It's essentially different than the daman. And daman has to have this condition, which they invented for their mind, that are not even derived in a persuasive way from Sharia, but let's assume it's derived, and then came to conclude that all insurance contracts are haram. But this is based on qiyas. This is a different type of contract. That's the reason Muhammad Anas al-Zarqa and his father Muhammad al-Zarqa, the two scholars of Damascus, said even the commercial contract of commercial insurance is halal, and there's no problem because it's a new contract. It's not an ancient daman. It's completely different. And then a conference of fuqaha and so on came and concluded that so-called daman takafuli, mutual insurance is okay because the people work together in a pool and they support each other. And there's many ahadith about people supporting each other, even pooling their money and distributed equally, for example. So they took from that this is halal. They did not need that. If they applied that, they should have looked at the contract, see is it a new contract? Is there any Sharia injunction trying to prohibit or making some of it haram and some aspect of haram? Then it's okay. But they did not need to search for something making it halal. It is halal by definition, by default. But if someone says it's haram, then he has to bring the evidence for haram. This has substantial results in economy. The same with the printing press. It's a tool. It's made out of pieces of the universe. So all parts of it is halal. The ink is halal. The material is halal. The processes and the action are halal. And writing by hand or writing by a machine or imprinting or whatever, stamping. People before were using their stamp, like they use their seal to seal. That's stamping. It's halal. All of that is halal. So combined in a machine. How come that they made it haram?
Okay, well, just to interject there. So there's two things. Hizb already.
No, I mean that the principle is applied consistently and adopted properly will solve considerable number of fiqh issues and shows that many of the fiqh conclusions are based on faulty evidences. And in negligence of this fundamental principle. The principle is qat'i. If you looked at the Quran and Sunnah, it's by necessity. It has to be like that. It's not possible otherwise. And doesn't contradict the principle that all action needs an evidence. There is, and the evidence has come. All actions are permissible until I tell you otherwise.
Even Ibn Hazm on the issue of contracts, he would say he was of the point of view that you'd have to qualify it beforehand because of.
Ibn Hazm said because he misunderstood the كل شرط ليس في كتاب الله فهو باطل. He wanted his problem. Ibn Hazm has a subconscious problem that the rulers in his time in Andalus, they're called the Muluk al-Tawaif, the scattered kingdoms there, they were making contracts with the kuffar and fighting against each other, which led to ultimately to the disappearance and collapse of Islam in Andalusia. So he wanted, motivated by that, with the desire to make these contracts invalid, instead of saying that they are invalid because they are lying to the kuffar, which is have been sufficient. Instead, he decided only those shurut or the conditions which have been enumerated in the Book of Allah. But it's not what our Messenger Allah said. Any condition which is not in the Book of Allah is invalid. And this is true. And all conditions are permitted in the Book of Allah, meaning the one which contradicts the Book of Allah. By necessity. There's no other explanation for that. And that was in the context of the issue of wala of Buraira. Buraira was paying herself off to be freed by her masters, and Aisha made her an offer, say, listen, I will buy you for your master. I will pay you off, meaning I buy you for your master. Now I am buying you. She's not buying herself, making herself free. I am buying you for masters and freeing you. But Aisha, because she was in young age and not sophisticated, matter of fiqh at that time at least, but your wala will be to me. That's true, because if Aisha buys her and frees her, then she has the wala. The wala is an alliance, a relation of alliance between the owner and the free slave, so that the ex-owner could have a share in the inheritance, for example, and a few other things, including the free slave can carry the name of the tribe of the owner as a part of his name. Yeah, the various things the relation will establish and will know in fiqh detail. Now the guys there say no, we keep our wala for ourselves. That's a violation of the fundamental reason, because wala is based on you free, and Aisha will buy and free. So what did they have to do? They sold her and they have nothing to do with her anymore. So how can they condition the wala? This condition contradicts the meaning of wala. It's an invalid condition, and the Prophet has stressed that. Say every shart in kitab Allah فهو باطل. So in that case. But he told her, don't worry about they are idiots. They don't know what's called. They are making a condition which is invalid. And this is also an evidence that if a party make a condition which is invalid, but does not completely fundamentally annihilate the contract, then you may accept, knowing that this condition will fall at the wayside. That's permissible, especially in this case, because it will result in freeing a slave, which is having a great high virtue. And they have to suffer for their stupidity at an invalid condition. And Aisha bought her and freed her, and the wala was for Aisha. And the Prophet gave a sermon for this matter. See, and then he said, إِنَّمَا الْوَلَاءَ لِمَنْ أَعْتَقْ. Al-wala is exclusively to one who did atq. By the way, if she, many fuqaha did not address this point, by the way, if she has freed herself, bought herself, and became free on mukataba, who made atq for her? She made her atq for herself. They sold her to herself. So they don't have even wala. Even in the case of mukataba, there should be no wala by necessity. إنما الولاء لمن أعتق. Exclusively, al-wala is for the one who does atq. The one who do mukataba. You have a slave and said, okay, I will buy myself from you and pay you so and so much in installment or in one lump sum, and then he become free. He bought himself out. He did not set him free. You have no virtue. You may have some hasanat, obviously, agreeing to the contract. As a matter of fact, Umar ibn Khattab, by the way, just a side note, was the point of view that if the slave offered to, and he's capable of paying himself off, the master is obliged to accept that. So it's an obligation. He cannot get away from it. But he has no virtue. He did not free the slave. If he want to have the wala, and they have the virtue of freeing a slave, which is freeing from the hellfire, every part by part of the slave, then he would have freed him without money. That's itq. But this is not atq, the sale. You're selling him to himself. He bought himself out. Let's give you an example. So that one is the invalid because it contradicts the meaning of wala and contradicts the meaning of freeing a slave and atq. Freeing a slave is not selling a slave to himself. That's not freeing a slave. Taking money for freeing is not freeing. Freeing is freeing completely free. That's out of question. That's not free. That's not tahrir raqaba. Tahrir raqaba is telling you are free without any compensation. Otherwise, it's not tahrir raqaba. So you see, there are many implications of these things of the contracts. So many contracts which the scholars are wavering because they are trying to get a list of contracts which have been on at the time of the Prophet and compare do qiyas to that. You don't need do qiyas. You have the general rule. So the claim that the basic ruling of validity has no consequence shows that someone is stuck in a circular argument, because he's still insisting on his qiyas and faulty point of view and does not want to review them from first point. First of all, each action needs an evidence, absolutely, and it's the end of scam that all actions are permissible. We that started even with Adam. Do whatever you want. You can eat, you can drink, do everything, whatever you want, except one thing: don't come to this tree. Nothing else. There was nothing, no injunction whatsoever for them. So from that day already, he told them, you are free to do everything. And most likely they were naked even at that time. Later, the devil had make them aware about their nakedness, and then they needed to cover themselves. They were covered actually by fitra. When they say libasahum, the libas of the fitra, most likely. But we don't go into these fine points of history of the initiation of humanity, which is obviously in dark history. We have only the Quran to guide us in these things. Some scholars say they have something like feathers and things like that. That's obviously imagination. No, that's not what the devil was trying to tear away from them. It's trying to take their attention to their sexuality in such a way which could become, if it's in wedlock, it's haram. Before that, they were doing it naturally. They were not conscious about it. He made them conscious about that. But anyway, what's the interpretation? What does it exactly mean? Leave that aside. But in any case, everything was permissible, except only that one specific, even that one specific tree. هذه الشجرة, one specific tree, not even the genus of that trees. They were not even obliged to check if this is the genus. It's one specific, single, identical tree. So the claim this is non-consequential shows really the circularity and the unwillingness to open his mind to really to overcome the accumulated mistakes and rubbish of Islamic history of fiqh. Plenty of qiyasat and things which has no reason whatsoever. Just to give you one example, there's many madhahib, Hanafi and also Hanbali, claim that bleeding will invalidate wudu. But the Sahaba were engaged in so many battles, and no single narration ever that the one who was injured was ordered to make wudu because he's injured, he bled, either bleeding or one drop or bleeding profusely, like the Hanbali say, all that they made qiyas from the bleeding of the woman in menses, most likely. That's maybe the source of it. Or they were somehow affected by Talmudic injunction in this area of purity, because Talmud has certain strange and excessively over the board issues of purity. And some people have been, because they have Jewish origin or they were from Yemen, where Judaism was widely spread, they got infected that and thought this is the Sharia, which continue further like that. So the fiqh has to be cleaned, and one of the main cleaning is that, and also the way to argue about fiqh has to be cleaned. So they claim this is not consequential and secondary, and hardly it should be qat'i if they're so contrary. No, the people have neglected it. But if you go to Quran, the Quran is clear and absolutely certain about that. The same ayah which can be argued, خلق لكم ما في السماوات والأرض جميعا منه, they say منافع. Who is منافع? خلق لكم ما في السماوات والأرض جميعا منه. For example, when the animals are created for you, you can eat them, you can do whatever with them, you can even burn them, but that's excluded by a clear hadith, that you don't burn animals, for example, brand them in the face. And of course, regarded as kabira and cares the one who do that. So they were allowed only to do the branding because they marked animals by branding. That's in all cultures, not in Arabic culture. I think also in America they branded, and it's famous in cowboy movies and so on, a certain branding which indicates the ownership. And Al-Abbas was so worried about that he used to do branding his animal so far back on the thigh, near to the tail, to avoid being even as far as possible from the face, because the Prophet cares anyone branding animals in the face. The Arab branding anywhere. And the Prophet said, لعن الله من فعل ألم عنها عن هذا, because he prohibited that. But it would have been permissible. torturing the animal also basically permissible until the Sharia made an injunction. The animal should not be tortured or beaten or overloaded more than their limits. That's by Sharia injunction. Not because of the general permissivity has been violated. No, that has been originally the case. So that has considerable consequence. For example, animal experiments is the basic permissibility, provided the Sharia that there will be no deliberate torturing or doing pain more than necessary. And for example, exterminating animals should be done as merciful as possible. Well, like for example, I said, if you slaughter an animal, then sharpen your knife so that you don't torture the animal. That's a clear injunction. And he made an injunction when someone was have 2 sheep and they pulled 1 sheep and slaughtered it for the other. Say, do you want to kill her twice? Why how do you slaughter her in front of the other animal? Because the animal see the slaughtering and has obviously is being terrified. Although it does not have a full consciousness, but it does recognize that the other animal has been killed and so on, and will be terrified. So it's killed twice. The Prophet prohibited that, or made a dislike at least. So there is an injunction there. Otherwise, the basic rule of whatever you can do with animals, whatever you want, was created for you. You are the master over them. You do whatever you want with them. No. Yes, you do whatever you want with them, but there's a limitation in certain things. Prohibition, burning, torture, etc., etc., etc. Even cutting a part of it and eating it, because any part of the animal which has been separated from it, and the animal is still alive, that part is maita, cannot be eaten. So this will cut anyway. And the prohibition of dam al-masfuh. What is the reason for that? Dam al-masfuh. Actually, originally, the Arabs used, for example, in famine, used, for example, to go to a main vein or something in animals, especially in camels, cut it, take some blood, seal it again, and drink that blood as a food. This is maita, and this also has a specific prohibition of drinking blood. So it's excluded from the permissibility of the universe. So his claim that it has no consequence, no, it has plenty of consequences and plenty of rules, and quite a number of them have been missed by scholars, and they then restored to qiyas and things like that because they did not apply the rule correctly. And they claim it is not qat'i, it's qat'i. The evidence of the Quran is necessary, it's qat'i. What's meaning created you for sam'a, خلق لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة لعلكم تشكرون, so that you may be thankful. I mean, if you use them, it's a benefit from Allah. So you are at liberty to use everything of them until I prohibit you otherwise. So you can look at everything. Everything can be looked at too, unless I prohibit you, etc. So this is the mindset. It is arguing with the false for the falsehood, going in circular argument instead of going really, is the structural argument showing it's qat'i or not? And let your mind go along Quran and Sunnah and the evidence there, and let your mind analyze it and see. Also, there are other supporting evidences, for example, in Quran, in Sunnah, and we have explained that it's not only the one who is asking, who is my father, something like that. Also, people asking about haram and halal. They have been rebuked. And I had hadith of Rasulullah that one of the most guilty is someone who asked about something which has not been prohibited and became prohibited because of his some questions as a punishment for being intrusive and bugging the Prophet. And he said it destroyed the nation before you, that they were going back and forth with their prophets and asking about everything until everything became prohibited, and they were squeezed in a corner. And all of that in the book of Tawheed. All of that, if you take all of that and put it and analyze it consistently and logically, you will come to conclusion it's qat'i. There's no escape from that. There's absolutely no escape from it. How come? Don't come to me. Don't ask me. Meaning go and do haram? No. Do whatever I don't. If there's something haram, I will tell you. And what Allah addressed in His book is as He addressed. Otherwise, don't accept from Allah His permission. There's so many hadith and so many narrations, in addition to the general principle of the creation of the universe for man and the creation of eyes, sight, and heart. So heart, what mean heart? That's all the capacity of thinking. You can think about everything, you can will everything.
Sheikh, the good illustration of that is the one where the companions mentioned that they were reserved with their wives until revelation stopped, or the Prophet ﷺ passed away.
Yeah, the coitus interruptus, yeah.
So
That's one of the evidences that كنا نعزل القرآن ينزل ولو كان حراما لنهانا عنه. They didn't ask about that because they were ordered not to ask. We have even one significant interesting hadith which related also to Hijrah. And Nawas ibn Sab'an said, I was in Medina, which refused the idea that Hijrah is physical movement. Hijrah meaning accepting the citizenship of the domain of Muhajirin, of the domain of Islam. He said, I was in Medina 1 year, lam uhajir. I did not do Hijrah. What does it mean? He's in Medina. He's physically in Medina, meaning I did not give bay'ah as a citizen of Medina. Then become citizen. Why? Because everyone who give bay'ah, one condition of bay'ah that he doesn't ask. Don't ask questions. Because everyone gave bay'ah at his time. He came, I think, in the 4th of year. I don't know which year, but he came, I think he was combining for 6 years. So maybe come in the 4th year. So it was already well established. Do not ask if you immigrate. Don't come to the first ask about halal, haram. Do everything. Haram and halal is clear in the Quran, and you will be reported to you. Don't do that. Then it is binding on you. If it's not reported to you, do it. So he stayed 1 year asking about everything came in his mind because he has a liberty. Does not give a covenant. He's not a citizen. He's a passerby still for that year. Until the last thing is mentioned, I asked about virtue and evil. And you feel البر الإثم محاكة في صدرك وتردد في قلبك وأخرتها. The evil or the ithm, the small deed, the small behavior, you know it is evil if it goes back in your heart and you don't like that people look at you or know that you are thinking about it or wanting it. That's a sign of evil. But this obviously addresses someone with correct fitra, with correct understanding of Islam. So this is more the spiritual side of it. That's the last thing. Then after that, he came by and became citizen. Then he shut up. He did not ask anymore. So all of this together, if you take it, it creates necessary knowledge that the basic ruling is permissibility for everything. For everything. And not like Sheikh Taqi in this ayah, when he mentioned this ayah in the Quran, last time Sheikh mean that someone stood who is my father, someone like that, someone like that. Yes, that was one of it. That was one of it. But it's not only that. With narratives which are in totality mutawatir, create necessary knowledge. So that's the first thing of the blunder which they fall in this. So that's a fundamental importance. I would think this is half of the knowledge. Half of the fiqh comes from this. If we understand that, then the fiqh will become easy, ahkam will become easy. Extremism will be mitigated. All these filthy qiyas and so on, and filthy qiyas and these complicated Jewish style, Talmudic style deductions will be reduced to almost to zero, which means that the mashayikh and the scholars and so on will lose the authority and the command over the people, because they want to have the authority, which lead ultimately to make them lords beside Allah, like the ahbar al-ruhban of Bani Israel. تأخذوا أحبارهم ورهبانهم أربابا من دون الله والمسيح ابن مريم. Things are clear in the book of Allah, and they still go to the Ahbar al-Ruhban. And the Ahbar al-Ruhban, obviously, being put in a power position, and human nature, what it is, they make things complicated, so the common man cannot deal with matters. He has to go to the Ahbar al-Ruhban, and even to the extreme that even forgiveness, you have to go through that. In Christianity, at least, you have to go do confessions to be forgiven, and all of this nonsense. At least in Catholic Church, at least. I think the Protestants have rebelled against that. I think it's only the Catholics are still stuck with it. So this is substantial. This is not a secondary issue of less importance, but because they insist on that, they got stuck in that. They got stuck, and the Sheikh also, the motivation of Sheikh for that is the action is that again the issue of that calling for khilafah and so on. We have to evidence that they have evidence for not calling. We have evidence for this. It's not true. That's all not true. That's only going overboard. I would say this point of the basic ruling of permissibility for action for everything in the universe is fundamental and well established Sharia and dictated by necessity of knowledge and dictated clearly by the Quran. Even if you look at the Quran, لَقَدْ فَصَّلَ لَكُمْ مَا حُرِمَ عَلَيْكُمْ. He subdivided and clarified what's prohibited on you, meaning everything which outside the mufassal mujmal, the general thing is permissibility. The necessity is permissibility and dictated also by necessity of reason. Otherwise, the people will not be able. The moment a messenger comes, everyone will freeze in his place, waiting for the messenger to give him permission. And then they find an excuse, say, oh no, meaning that natural action like eating and drinking and smoking, smelling and so on, are excluded. That's natural. How to exclude it? That's tale of Allah. If the action is an evidence, then message, can I breathe? Messenger of Allah, yeah, you breathe. Start breathing. If you go to extreme, that's the meaning of it. Which is rationally also impossible. And also historically impossible. We know the Messenger of Allah came, he did not address even their marriages, their transaction, their buying and selling, did not address them at all. He approved them as they, later on, some of these have been, even some of them were not addressed for a long time until Medina, until they were prohibited, like drinking alcohol and so on, drinking khamr. Was rampant. Some of the Sahaba, like Umar and Hamza, radiallahu anhuma, they were first-class drinker, very sophisticated drinker. Until Hamza died, khamr was prohibited after him. I don't know address these things. I mean, it was permitted by necessity. I didn't even address it at all. I did not ask him about that. You know, he came to call them, La ilaha illallah Muhammad Rasulullah. All these idols, all these deities do not exist. Or if they exist, they don't have the right of legislation, or they don't have the rank of being deity. That's it. That's all. All entities you regard as Lord beside Allah or a deity, other than non-existing, than imagination, or if they exist like the chieftains and the leaders, so they don't have the right to enact laws which making them Lord beside Allah. That's it. Simple. That's all that was there. Few things were prohibited, eerie, like zina and so on, which was in Mecca defined essentially really going to prostitutes. Specifically. There's even a question mark if you have boyfriend, by girlfriend, and said was defined as zina or not at that time yet. That's later. That's more polished and developed in Medina, but not in Mecca. So this is just I would say if we argue about this, then we have a real fundamental problem. A fundamental problem. We got stuck. That is exactly happened what in the previous thing. We got stuck in the books of fiqh and what Mawardi said, and this said, for example, in Matar al-Ahkam Sultaniya, instead of going to the book of Allah. It's exactly like what the Jews have happened to the Jews. For them, the Talmud is the reference. Barely anyone go to although these do not contain, they contain some of that what Allah revealed, like what they have the Old Testament and so on, is mostly historical books, but it contains some statements of the prophets, some of their behavior and so on. That's completely forgotten and ignored. Barely read. What's really read, the Protestants have improved that slightly bit because they rebelled against the church and then gave the people freedom to go and read the scripture, and that resulted, for example, that many Protestant factions, they got the Sabbath as the day of rest, not Sunday, and reject the Sunday and so on, because they started reading and opening their eyes. While the church which took the monopoly of the interpretation, declared Sunday and abolished Saturday, abolished circumcision and so on, and also the many Christian in America, many Protestant reintroduced circumcision and so on. Regarding this is still valid, but they do not accept the claim of the churches. It has been abrogated, etc. And the Jews are much worse. Barely any Jew can go to the previous scripture. They essentially their reference is the Talmud. That's what has happened to Muslims also. It's on the Prophet what about that? You will follow the steps of previous nation, and he give an extreme example, step by step. Even if they go in a lizard hole, you will go in a lizard hole. But that's exactly what it is. The lizard hole is one of the lizard hole is going in these books of fiqh and regarding them and the previous ulama and regarding them as the one who a lawmaker and the jurist. No, the lawmaker is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. اتبعوا ما أنزل إليكم من ربكم, not to X and Y, Z. And the messenger is being followed because he report infallible way from not because of his personality, that he has nice eyes and a well-organized beard. No, because he is the one infallibly reported from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guarantees. That's it. So this is although this may sound a little bit excessive, but this is one such a fundamental principle. If we don't comprehend that, because it reflects about where we take really, which reference frame we are relating to. If it's not what has been revealed, then I don't know which reference we are referring to. He later says about mujtahideen previous the precedents. We don't need precedences. We can go back to Quran and Sunnah. We have the precedents and we discuss them. And so this statement from the scholar is mistaken because of this and this and this. And we bring our argument based on Quran and Sunnah. Otherwise, we attribute them infallibility. But since they are definitely not appointed to pray from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then we appointed them roads beside Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Unless you can prove that they're infallible and they And they are the one who report from Allah like the Shia, and becoming the infallible Imam. That's almost what has happened when people call them Al-Sunnah. This is simply not acceptable. This will really undermine the basic fundamental root of Islam. There's only one deity, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Deity in meaning of creation, etc. is only one. All other things is just imagination. And deity in meaning of the Supreme Lord who makes Lord. Yeah, some people claim to be having that, calling themselves whatever kings and so on. They rarely call themselves lords or gods. Except Pharaoh. Pharaoh can do it at his time. Modern times, nobody. You don't see the parliament in Westminster claiming that we are Lord beside Allah, but they are acting and behaving as Lord beside Allah. So they exist, but they don't have that right. They usurp the right of the divinity. Essentially, they're saying to Allah, get out of the throne, we sit there. We deserve to sit there and give commands. That's what they're doing. And that's shirk akbar, that's real shirk, kufr. And this is really the most fundamental and important shirk. It starts with this way. And then imaginary entities and myths and constructed about their acting in the universe, and they can create, and they can, that comes later. Originally, that's the shirk how it began. People have become tyrants, and they become commanding the people, and people say, how can they command to do that? They must have some relation to the heaven. They are the son of the heaven, etc. Okay, they have creative power, and after they die, they join the sun god and merge with him and things like that. That's already happened in the Pharaoh time. We know how things develop. So this is fundamental. I wouldn't say it's not secondary. First of all, it's fundamental. It's a fundamental principle of usul. The evidence are qat'i. And we discussed it in detail. I'm just giving hand-waving arguments now. Someone should go and also already the English translation is available. It's available for sale from Amazon. Yes, I understand that, but it's available. And the Arabic is available for free. That's available. And most of the people who had the bring revision are fluent in Arabic. It's available. And in full detail, in a boring, complete full detail, based on all other evidences which interconnected, so create necessity. There's no escape from that. I would say no escape from that for someone who have read it, except by either being stubborn denial or just insisting on his taqleed, which may get him then, in the case if he understood the evidence on, may get him in the border of kufr, that he giving his scholar precedence over Allah and his messenger. I don't think any Muslim would do that, unless he's completely blinded by following the scholars and completely has deactivated his mind. And it happens. Sometimes you activate your mind. Let me give you one joking story. For example, someone will say, saying a woman should not go to the masjid. And then he said, said, why? What the evidence for that? Said, don't please. So Aisha said, if the Messenger of Allah would have been alive, and he would have seen what the women have done, he would have prohibited that. I said, I don't see the evidence for that. I'm still insisting on my that women have to go and are permitted to go to the masajid. And he repeated that until I told him, do you mean Aisha sallallahu alayhi wa sallam? Then he woke up. But what you are invoking Aisha? It's irrelevant what Aisha says. But I could go to extreme and told him, listen, I don't want to be extreme. You are giving a bit there. That statement, Aisha, is a moment where she became maybe overexcited. She was shocked about the behavior of women, etc. But the meaning of the statement, if you take it in a strict sense, meaning the Messenger of Allah was prohibiting and according to what he see, or reaction, not a revelation. There's a statement of kufr even to that level. But I didn't tell him that. I don't want to shock him and waver his belief in Islam to that level. But this is the... Is Aisha kafir? No. She was in a moment of being excited. Just a psychological reaction. It has no philosophical or fundamental justification to say something like that. If someone had thought about kafir, it's not possible. The Messenger could not have, even if he has lived, he would not have prohibited. Because what has revealed to him is that what is valid until Yawm al-Qiyamah. And by the way, that things like that could happen in the future are known to him very well. He himself warned, he said, I saw all types of people of hellfire except two types. You know the famous hadith. People have whips in their hand and beat the people, called the jilwaz, the policemen, the oppressor rulers, and take on women who are covered and uncovered, walking like this and so on, exciting sexual feelings, etc. And that scares them. They are cursed. I didn't see them. They are not available in my time, nor is the jilwaz. Now, the Arabs did not have the tradition of these policemen going with whips because they don't have tyrannical rulers, and the Prophet did not see them. But they were at the time available in the Roman and Persian Empire. He did not see them, but they will come after him. And this type of woman doing that. Maybe they have this type existed in China or in Japan. Maybe they, geisha or what's the name, they were there. He did not see them. And then a Muslim world, something like that happened later by infection and by transgression, by fisq and so on. So he warned of them. So all of that is known to Allah in advance, or at least this type and these forms. And he warned of them. He warned they will be tyrant. So if you reach that time, don't be, and he mentioned 4 jobs specifically not to be. No, neither Arif under them, nor an accountant, nor I don't remember the 4 others, but let like this or this or this or this. Don't be with them. Don't work with them with these. That's not in his time. So Aisha's hadith is completely out of line, but the people take it as an evidence because they have switched off their brain. That's the problem. I hope that the Shabab of the Hizb and other they switch on their brain, which has been switched off. It doesn't work this way. If you're carrying the Islamic da'wah, you want to establish really the Khilafah Rashida ala minhaj al-Nubuwah. It doesn't work this way. You have to go to dig better than that. Now, Sheikh Taqi did his best ijtihad. At his time, he was most likely convinced that what the scholar did over history is really genuine ijtihad for the sake of Allah. Not all of them did that, by the way. We can get shocking examples for that. And then and the Ahkam al-Sultaniyya wal-Mawadi he regarded as a model. It is just an attempt of the Qadi al-Qudat. Mawadi was the Qadi al-Qudat. I'm not saying he's a government scholar or he's a traitor, no. But he was attempting to, the current situation in his time, to give it at least some legitimacy. So that's not kufr bawah. Because the alternative was this is kufr. This is all kufr. How I am a Chief Justice and the Qadi al-Qudat in a system of kufr. So he got it almost to the border of kufr without being kufr. That's it. That's if you read the book carefully, that's what you get the impression of. He started to justify a situation which is so extremely ignoring shura, so extremely ignoring fundamental principle of justice and equitable distribution by all kinds of arguments and necessities and things like that, etc. But this is not a pure model. Necessity has its own rulings and condition, but this is not that what fiqh should be about. It should be given the so-called genotype, fundamental type, essential type, and then what exception can be made in certain emergency situation and connected and clearly specify what is the emergency, what is the necessity, and how long it persists. Necessity cannot persist until Yawm al-Qiyamah. Then it is not a necessity anymore, meaning the Sharia is not valid. And if it's supposed to be revealed from Allah subhanahu, who knows what will happen in the future until Yawm al-Qiyamah, meaning simply that it's not from Allah, it's from someone else. There must be some problem there, some fundamental problem. The matter is more fundamental than people think. It's not a matter of just a matter of driving some fiqh issues or establishing that the insurance, the so-called commercial issues, halal and haram. It's much deeper and more fundamental than that. That's the reason I put in the book of Tawhid, because I know this is fundamental. The fundamental principle is of utmost importance. The same like Khatm al-Nubuwwah, it's fundamental importance. Like the completion of the deen is fundamental importance. If we say completion of the deen, for example, he talks about ijma' and so on down. We'll come to that. Which ijma'? Which ijma'? Ijma' which against the Nas is impossible. It can't be. It has not happened. It's just a claim. People claim that to cover up their tracks when they fail to bring it. Well, I won't say ijma' of all scholars. Besides, the ijma' of the scholars is irrelevant. The ijma' is the ijma' of the ummah. And the ijma' of the ummah must start with the Sahaba. Because they were all the ummah at their time. And the people in their time. If it's not there, mujma' alayh, and clearly specified and so on, then it's not ijma'. It has been something invented later. It cannot be. If it's not deen at the time, it's not deen later. Can't be. It must be some kind of construct which people imagine it being deen. It's not deen. And the ijma' or non-ijma' is irrelevant. Many scholars, majority of scholars on that is irrelevant. Relevant is the evidence. And the evidence, and Quran and Sunnah are protected. As we said, Quran is protected. There's no doubt about that. Even Qur'ani recognize that. And the Sunnah could mean two things. The Sunnah meaning the essential of Sunnah is the acts and the statement and the acts and the approval of the Prophet ﷺ. in his presence at his time, when that's as such, and this is definitely revelation that's proven in the book of Tawheed with certitude, in Hidayah and that will make you a kafir statement. And the question is that the narrative of the Sunnah. The narrative of the Sunnah. The narrative is, we can't question the narrative of the Sunnah, but still that narrative, because the Sunnah is definitely part of the dhikr and wahi by the evidence of the Quran, and this is in the book of Tawheed. So it's protected, but it's protection different than the protection of the Quran. The Quran is protected letter by letter, even in its written form, while the Sunnah is protected in its totality, as we argued there. So it's binding. So the Qur'ani are wrong. And we show that ultimately the Qur'ani will end in kufr by necessity. But we cannot call them kafir, because the conclusion from a statement, you make a statement which leads to necessity to kufr, but it's not your statement because you did not recognize that. But if you made aware about that and shows clearly that this is, and you insisted, then you become a kafir. But the statement itself may lead to kufr, and you still adopt that statement, and you are not a kafir. So not doing takfir on Qur'ani in summary, but ultimately they will end in kufr. So that's protected, and it has all what we need. And we'll come, then we come to the issue. We'll show where is that protected, and where is the mistaken matter of khilafah fard or not fard, and so on. So the issue of basic ruling permissibility is fundamental, not because it helps in many fiqh issues and solve many fiqh problems straight away, as it should have been and has been done by the Sahaba. I'll give you an example. When Umar needed, they were discussing how to distribute these income and so on the people. You have the number of people. You're not dealing now just with a few hundreds of immigrants and few thousand of Ili Ansar. We're dealing now with tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, cities full of armies, and you have to keep records. So someone suggested to keep records, dawawin, make dawawin, written records. So Umar started the dawawin. No, we want to start the dawawin. The people who are skilled in keeping dawawin are, in the first instance, people from Sham, Iraq, and especially from Yemen. Yemen was under Persian rule and the Persian Empire. It's a very sophisticated, advanced empire, and many Yemeni, especially some of his slaves and his supporters, like not Aslam. I think Aslam also was writing and others. Anyway, many from Yemen, they started dawawin. They started dawawin right away. Now, these people were skilled in keeping dawawin in the Persian style, and they were skilled even writing it in Persian. He kept dawawin in Persian. Nobody discussed that even. No need to discuss it. There's no issue to discuss that. Using Persian is mubah or not mubah. Writing dawawin in Persian, so he did it, adopted right away. He did not say, no, Arabic is the language of the Quran, we must honor Arabic, and so on, must translate it. This would delay the work. What is needed to manage the affairs. So he adopted dawawin, and there was no discussion. Check history if you find any discussion, how to keep track. And someone said they have records and they call it diwan, etc. He established a diwan. They didn't discuss even what the diwan was. And we know it was in Persian for decades. They didn't need. It was so obvious for them. It was so obvious. They come to conclusion, we're not able to keep that in track just by memorization. It has to be written down. Simple. Straightforward. And if it would have been printed press at the time, they would have used the printing press, which would be faster and nicer. Anyway, Diwan will not be done printed press because it's not a book which should be repeated. It's entry by entry, so it has to be done hand. It would have been blockchain at the time, they would have put blockchain right away without any discussion. Because they are reasonable people, rational people. They have comprehended what's the meaning of Quran and Sunnah in general, and they understood the meaning of basic permissibility. Understood what was the meaning of the being Muslim and so on, really, essentially. It's not that everything is haram until get evidence. No, everything is halal. But a certain obligation I have to do, and certain prohibition I have to avoid. And they're few and clear and well structured and well established. And they did that. And that's the reason they swept all these empires, which were complicated and overburdened with churches and scholars and fiqh and so on. It cannot stand in front of clear and dynamical way of thinking and managing the affairs and creative, establishing things as they come without much discussion. So I think this is fundamental. It's as long as the Hizb and the Shab and other people, obviously, when discussing with the Brotherhood, because they have no adoption, they are amorphous. Everyone adopts whatever he wants. They even still think that the ex-government in Afghanistan, who were under the American banner and fought with them against Taliban, that they are good old mujahid, that they're good Muslims. They still don't understand that fighting under the banner of Kufar against Muslim and working under them, under their guidance, is an act of kufr. They still don't understand. So if such fundamentality is missing in their mind, then don't waste time with basic ruling of permissibility and things like that with these people. But people who are supposed to be more structured and more well-informed, that issue should settle. That should be an issue of general adoption. Essentially, we are going with this to the time of the Prophet again, just giving them back. There's nothing new. We're just articulating it in a sophisticated, advanced language, because life advanced and people have become sophisticated and have used to write long treatises and philosophical discourses and ilm al-kalam image, the philosophy image, and so on. So we cannot make it in the simple language of the Prophet. They have to translate it in our sophisticated, more illiterate language. Because the nation was illiterate. Now we are literate. So we have to formulate it in a literate language. That's it. That's it. We're just getting there, where the people have been at the time of Salam until he passed this world and completed the was complete. And the way they understood it subconsciously, the majority of them. Does not mean that this one did not make a mistake, this one made a blunder, this one. That's natural, the human being, they're not infallible. But in their community, generally, they understood what the whole job is all about. The whole life meaning was all about. They understood it. Even the symbol Rabi' ibn Amr, when he spoke to Rustum, he said, Allah sent us to get the people from the tightness of dunya to the openness of dunya and akhirah. Not of akhirah only. No, it's not akhirah. It's also dunya, openness of dunya. No tyrants, no central authorities, no oppression. Everyone is his own master, provided he does not transgress in the others and live in the community smoothly and obey the rulers when it should be obeyed, and the ruler should not interfere except in the necessities, the very few necessities which joint life needed, not the way Mawardi developed or my Sheikh Taqi thought about, even to the level that even zakah cannot be given unless there is a khalifa. No, there was nothing like that in their mind. That developed later and became even more twisted and more complicated, both in the Shia direction and the Sunni direction. Or the Shia went to more extremes. That without an Imam, even Jum'ah is not obligatory, this is not obligatory. It went even worse. But the Sunni, especially those who nowadays like Madkhali and so on, they are almost as bad as the Shia in that. Chaining Muslims that they can't move anywhere. The ruler is almost like a half divine. That's Western Shia. At least the Shia could have argued that this is only for Ahlul Bayt and for certain persons. Even some of them do not exist or hidden somewhere in a tunnel or something like that. But at least theoretically it may be argued something. But Madkhali, you can't argue anything. It's completely catastrophic. And this is how it develops when the Quran and Sunnah is forsaken, especially the Quran as a primary. Then the first step was getting Sunnah and make it dominant over the Quran and forgetting about the Quran, not going back to it and trying to make it to ta'wil and playing around, and then accumulation of the Quran, then this faqih said this faqih there, and then there was reference to this faqih, this faqih, this faqih, this faqih, and ultimately we have the Talmud, almost like a Talmudic nation now. But not almost a nation of revelation. Hizb should have. Sheikh Taqi did his best according to his time and the availability of things, and made some steps forward which were shocking at the time. But it doesn't stop there. In certain areas, he did not make the necessary breakthroughs. Honestly, we have to continue. So that's it. I'm arguing for that because I think this is very fundamental, and this will solve many problems. Now, next point, what he said. Okay, so this is say so different. So why that's not true? There should be no wide difference. The wide difference is because Quran and Sunnah have been forsaken and forgotten, and also the way of deduction. Like for example, the simplest principle is that when I said Quran, he did not say tadabbaru ayah. Quran, the whole Quran has to be pondered about and made to fit snugly and synchronized properly, using the necessity of Arabic language, because that is you are Arab, and the word come after them. If they are not Arab, they have to learn Arabic and understand it as if they were Arab. And this is not an easy job. So you have to have the Arabic capability, understanding of Arabic language. But most of the time, this is not a complicated issue. Some people went on the board that they have to know the إعراب of the ayah. Most of the time you don't need that. Most of the time you don't need that إعراب. But you need to have a real understanding of it as a language, as your mother language. And most of the time it's very simple and straightforward to understand. ولقد يسرنا القرآن الذكر فهل من مدكر. It's very easy. Only very few issues, dark issues, and usually are not related to أحكام شرعية. They are related to issue of غيب and issue of history, dark history. Like for example, when we discussed, you remember in Tafsir, we discussed Harut and Marut. This is dark غيب related to issues of old Babylon and the issues of magic and all these things, and psychological intimidation, all these things. That's number one. And the second one is maybe the issue of the story of Gharaniq and things like that. There's only a few places where you need really to dig and really work hard. The rest is almost straightforward. The rest is very straightforward. And also you have to see the life of the Prophet from the beginning and end, how he started fighting people, hostility, etc., how things were established. You have to go to the Sirah also, analyze it more probably than we've done. Now, when we go to the second part, first of all, his point of view concerning Nusra, we know it is faulty. We have the book of the recitation of Nusra, and it's already, alhamdulillah, is already translated. It's blatantly wrong. The Prophet never asked anyone to point him against the state. Never. Nusra was clearly saying, هل من رجل يحملني إلى قومه حتى أبلغ برسالة ربي فإن قريش منعتني بلغ رسالة ربي وهم يريدون قتلي. Any man can adopt me and carry me to his nation, his people. He carries, the man carries him, the head of state. So I can broadcast the message of my Lord peacefully. That's all. Because Quraysh had prevented me from carrying the message and threatened to kill me. That's all. Protect me from qatl. So I can brought the message. And it's the bay'ah, but we have in time when we was initially with Hizb, we were reading also with the brain switch on, switch off. The bay'ah is very clear that they support the messenger, and then and one part of it they say the truth, they don't fear any blame. Yes, fine, that's a general principle, and obviously that they give bay'ah that they say the truth. For us, the obligation is to hesitate true, or if we cannot say it, or if we are cowed or afraid, we are at liberty to shut up, at least, but not to say the untruth. That's permitted. That's kabira. That's kabira. But if you cannot say the truth, then. But those people give bay'ah to say the truth, even if it's bitter, and they don't fear the blames. So they're committed to more. So that's the reason for bay'ah for that. We are not committed to that. We're committed to say the truth if we can. If we don't, then close your mouth, at least. We are allowed to that. We are allowed to be a little bit weak and coward. But these guys committed themselves to more. Fine. And then, وَلَا نَازِعَ الْأَمْرَ أَهْلَهُ. We don't dispute with the one in charge. Who is the one in charge? Cannot be the Prophet. By necessity. Because it's inconceivable. And the one in plural. Unless we see kufr buah. That's the tribal chieftain of Medina. The one who were present with them. My coming to Medina and the protection of you does not mean that I'm going to dispute your leadership. Nor my people who are coming will dispute your leadership. Nor you dispute with you with each other for the leadership. This is not a revelation to rebel against proper rulers. As long as they don't show kufr buah. That's not the purpose of the revelation. And to undermine the social order. نعم.
لا تنسى الإعجاب والاشتراك في القناة